before we can do anything with our data, we first have to get the data. So in many ways, this is the most important part of statistics, because garbage in garbage out. I'll just look at two different examples to keep in mind. So what are we thinking about? So the examples would be your class, so maybe 20 to 30 people, or whatever your class size is, and a country. So 20 to 30 people, or a country. Because statistics began kind of when people were running countries. They basically wanted to know, how many people do we have? Since until you count, you have no idea. In fact, Sweden, who were very early adopters of statistics, thought that it was a similar sized country in population to England and France, and were shocked to find that that wasn't the case once they actually did bother to count. So often, if you want to know something about a group or something, you can just use a sample. So if I want to know something about, say, a class, well then that's only 20 to 30 people. That's not that many people. So you can just ask everyone, just find out. But if you're dealing with a whole country, that's a lot of hassle. Effectively, that's very expensive. So it's far more convenient just to take a sample. For example, from the newspapers, you'd hear about the Red Sea poll. And that's just a measure of how popular the different political parties are. Now, they don't go and ask every person in the country, but by using a sample, by just asking maybe 1,000 people, they can get a good sense of how the country feels. So get a sense, or get a measure of how popular parties are. Another example would be where you just take a census. So I'm interested to learn about a country. A census is where you do ask everyone. So then, as in early statistics, you get to find out how many people there are in the country, but also you get to find out, what the age profile is, and all kinds of things, which you can then use in your planning. So, do I need to have a school in this area, or will I need more hospitals? All kinds of things. I mean, unless you actually find out from a census, you don't really know otherwise. Now, of course, it's a trade-off. So the poll is far cheaper, but the census gives you better information. So if you are using a sample, so if using sample, you typically want to use a random sample. So if I wanted to know how people were doing in a particular class, if I took, say, 5 people and just asked them instead of asking all 30 people, I could just pick the people who are getting A's and B's, and that wouldn't give me useful information. That would be biased information. So you use random to avoid bias. Other things you would want from a sample is for it to be representative. Again, so that you're not asking just the people in your class who got an A or a B. Famous examples of that would have been Gallup. So Gallup essentially polled a couple of thousand people for a US election, while another group polled tens of millions of people. But it turned out that Gallup were far more accurate, which was very strange. I mean, how come the other group actually asked tens of millions of people, so far more people? Well, the problem was that group, they might have asked 10 million people, but they essentially asked people who were very likely, who were all, say, Republican Party voters. So, of course, if I just ask Republican Party voters, I'm not going to get a measure of the entire country. I didn't ask the Democrats. So likewise, I'm sure if I went to a group where most of the people were Democrat voters, I'd end up with the result saying, oh, it looks like people are going to vote for Democrats. So you have to be careful to actually have a sample who represent the entire group that you're interested in. Likewise, if you're doing marketing, or if you get a phone, you get a phone call and the person's doing a marketing survey, and then they ask you what's your age and what's your gender, because in marketing they're often interested in those, and they want to make sure that they don't end up having far more people from a particular gender, because that'll no longer represent the entire group that they're interested in. They're the main issues to do with getting samples. You can get samples in different ways. So you can do a survey and just ask people. Otherwise, you can do observational. So where you're more passive. You sit there and see what's going on. So, for example, if you're working with global warming, I'm just going to record what the temperature was today at 12 o'clock. So I have no control over anything else. All I can do is just measure. Also, there are designed experiments. So they're, like, say in a physics or any scientific experiment, you typically measure something and then you change the one variable and then measure it again and then change that variable a little bit again and then measure again, and then you plot to see what it looks like. So if I keep changing the temperature, how does the thing change? So in a designed experiment, you're in control of pretty much everything. So you can just try and zoom in on just the influence of that one variable and see whether there's a simple pattern. And finally, you have primary and secondary. Data. So primary data is the kind we were talking about. So where you yourself measure something, you just record stuff. So you jot down what you see. So there's no other there's no one else kind of involved. While secondary data is where you write down what other people have found out. So, when I want to find out what's the population of Ireland, I don't do a census. All I do is I look it up on the internet. So typically I'd use secondary data, because secondary data is cheap and it's quick. So there's a trade-off. I mean, if you are measuring if you're looking at something that other people have not looked at before, you're doing something new, then you'll end up turning to primary stuff, because then you can maybe see something that no one else has seen before, and you can be fully responsible when you write down that number. You can stand over that. You can say, no, that's what you get, as opposed to relying on trusting what the other person said when maybe they didn't do it very reliably. That's the foundation of what we're going to do, basically getting the numbers. So the rest of the lessons on statistics are going to be processing, interpreting, dealing with numbers.